You're up. Let us just get your PowerPoint going.
If you're interested in more of what Edward was talking about, he wrote a chapter in my upcoming book, which I want to read. Also, I have a chapter on the subject that I'm going to be talking about. So I have flyers. If anybody wants to contribute them, so you want to volunteer. Then I'll.
I can't hear anything.
Really cover the topics in detail. And Edward and I both, I can dig into the research very deeply. Anyway, that's why they're book chapters. Okay. So my name is. Can you hear me?
No, you need the microphone on.
Hello, everybody. My name is John Hamel. I'm a clinical social worker. I'm in private practice in the San Francisco Bay Area. For about 30 years, I've been conducting batterer intervention programs for men and women who were arrested for domestic violence. Many of these individuals came through the family court system, weren't convicted of any crime, but assumed to have been guilty of domestic violence. By the way, I've never, not once, as far as I know, had a female referred to my program to the family court for the batterers program. I've had lots of women referred for anger management, referred for personal counseling, because you see, women don't control. They're not agentic humans. They only react and they need therapy. I'm being a little facetious, but that seems to be the way the family court deals with abusive mothers. Abusive mothers are abusive because they grew up in a violent environment, because they're neurotic, because they drink too much, nothing having to do with their behavior. Okay, so for the last 20 years, I've been also doing research in the area of domestic violence. In the last 10 years, I've been doing mostly work as an expert witness in custody cases and also criminal cases. I represent the men who have been accused of domestic violence. I represent battered women. I've worked with prosecutors and I've worked with defense attorneys. So I try to be very objective in everything that I do. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about child custody and the best interest of children. This is kind of an overview of domestic violence and child custody cases. So next slide. So the challenge is, in general, traditionally, and even today, and even in the United States and Canada, men tend to have more of a structural advantage in terms of institutional power. So, but even back 20, 30, 40 years ago, there's one area where women had more of an advantage, okay, and that's the family, within family law, in terms of the family and the rights to have children. It wasn't always the case. There was a time in the 1800s when fathers had absolute right over their children, but that changed in the 20th century. Okay. So we've been moving towards greater gender equality over the last 30 or 40 years, except in the family court where it's still 1950. Okay, so domestic violence is really intimate partner violence. It's violence between intimate partners, whether they're married or cohabitating. Family violence is any kind of violence within the family. Child abuse and neglect includes violence against the children by the parents. That's verbal or physical or neglect. Intimate partner violence, as I said, is really it's a more fancy term, more precise term for domestic violence. And then intimate partner abuse is simply any kind of abuse between intimate partners that includes psychological abuse, coercive control, that magical phrase. It's everywhere. Coercive control is everywhere. And it includes sexual abuse, of course. Next slide. This is the California code section. I'm sure Canada has similar code sections regarding the importance of making sure that children are not in the custody of parents that are abusive to them, either directly or who are abusive towards one another, based on the premise when children witness their parents being violent, it causes them emotional distress, developmental issues, and behavioral problems, including mimicking their behavior, right? So these code sections are written in different ways, but all the states in the United States have them. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so I'm kind of going to paraphrase the slide here, but in California, and I understand in Canada now, there are laws that specify that psychological abuse, coercive control is something that's detrimental to children, therefore should be a consideration. Problem with that term coercive control is that it's been completely bastardized over the last few years. As a expert witness in family court cases, I can tell you firsthand how incredibly misused, it's shamelessly being misused. I had cases where it's not always the mother, but it's typically the mother who will make a claim that, you know, my ex-husband has been battering me and he has been coercively controlling me. So what she means by battering is that 3 years ago, they had an argument and she tried to stop him and he shoved her and she fell down. And what she meant by coercive control is when she was trying to spend $10,000 on a new trip to Hong Kong, he objected. I'm not kidding. It's a little of a caricature. Sometimes it's a little bit more serious than that, but I'm just telling you, there are a lot of cases like that. And the attorneys with a straight face are telling me that I need to help them show that there's coercive control in a particular case. Sometimes I just decline those cases completely. I don't even charge them the retainer ahead of time because it's not something I want to do. But obviously, sometimes there's a lot more to it than that. Next slide. So the thing about intimate partner violence, I think you already got a sense about just so far in the conference, hearing people talk about it, is it's a very heterogeneous phenomenon. There's two main myths about domestic violence. The first one is it's about battering it's about men who batter their partners in order to exercise, like Denise and others have talked about, to maintain male privilege. So yes, there are misogynistic men who have very strong notions about patriarchy and men's place in families. They're few and far between these days compared to your average batterer is an insecure male who grew up in an environment where his needs were not attended to and doesn't know how to communicate his feelings and allows conflicts to escalate because he doesn't know how to regulate his emotions. That's your typical male batterer. So it's domestic violence is not a gendered phenomenon. The other myth is that domestic violence is about battering and power and control. Every single website, as Denise will tell you, having done research on this, every single website that's by Battered Women's Advocates, National Coalition Against Domestic Violence, will define domestic violence as a pattern of control. Bullshit. Vast majority of domestic violence is called situational violence that Michael Johnson defined as arising from escalated conflict. It's not a pattern of power and control. Of course, there's a certain amount of control, and anytime you use violence against somebody or you denigrate them, there's a certain amount of, I mean, why are you doing it? But it's not the kind of systematic control that your stereotypical batterer does that people like Lenore Walker talked about. You know, it's not the kind of guy in the burning bed who's beating up his partner and threatening to kill her, repeatedly controlling her. It's not like the movie Enough with Jennifer Lopez, where she has to learn kickboxing in order to deal with her extremely controlling police officer boyfriend. Vast majority of domestic violence is lower level, it's sporadic, it doesn't involve high levels of power and control. It's basically couples conflict gone awry. That's really important. In the family court system, the vast overwhelming majority of cases that I see, and Edward will probably agree on this, just both as an academic and as a practitioner and as a family court expert, from all those three positions, what I see is a lot of family conflict with parents who want custody of their kids, and the attorneys are just very eager to give them the buzzwords to use to accuse their partners of being violent towards them. And most of the time, those charges are exaggerated. Not always, but usually. Okay. Well, I don't want to get too much in. The gender debate really is this, and I'm not saying all, but some men's rights advocates will say, at least the caricatured version is, these guys aren't violent, they're just alienated. Okay. Well, some of these guys are violent, and they're claiming alienation when there's no alienation. They're just violent and they're blaming their spouses. And then the battered women's advocates will say, well, there's no such thing as parental alienation. These are just violent dads who are blaming the moms. Okay. And as most of us know, the truth is somewhere in between. There are alienating moms or alienating dads. There are violent moms or violent dads. I see a lot more of the dads being alienated. And that's just because it's not because moms are more evil than dads. It's just that moms know that they can use that. They have the power to do that in that venue. In the family court system, the courts are only too eager to go along with mom's accusations. It's just because they can. Same power control, to the extent that does exist, is a function of the person's personality and also what they're allowed to do, what they can do. That's why studies show that men are better able to use intimidation and threats because they're bigger and stronger. Among gay couples, threatening to out your partner is a very good control tactic. It's not available to straight couples, right? So it's not that men are more evil and women are more evil, or gay people are more evil or less evil. It's that some human beings don't know how or don't want to negotiate fairly, and therefore will use controlling and abusive behaviors as a way to get their way. And it's not gendered. It has nothing to do with gender. Okay. I just want to mention it's very common for advocacy groups to cherry pick data that will support their findings. Okay. So be careful when you're reading a study. Where did they get their data? The model code and the laws in the family court system are derived from studies that were about 95% conducted with battered women. That's where they got their laws. So think about it. All those laws were put on the books because it was found that severely battered women experience all these symptoms, and so did their children. Well, but as I said, most family court cases don't involve that kind of battering. Next slide. The research is very clear. The long-term effects of domestic violence on children is not a function of gender. In the short term, there's evidence that children are more impacted emotionally in the short term by witnessing the father figure being violent relative to the mother figure, because dads, again, are generally bigger and stronger. But because through the process of observational learning, children observe, whether they observe mom or dad being violent, they still learn the same thing, which is it's okay to be violent. All right, so that's really important. Let's skip that because Edward very nicely covered that topic. Right, so legal administrative abuse is another form of power and control, which is very common in the family court system. Hard to distinguish sometimes between zealously advocating for your rights and legal administrative abuse. Sometimes that it's hard to find that distinction there. Okay, next. When in doubt, err on the side of caution. I agree with that. I agree with that. I think if there are legitimate accusations of domestic violence against a dad, I think they should be investigated, even if he's completely innocent. If it takes a few months, okay, have supervised visits for a while. What I object to is waiting a year and a half, 2 years, right? Dad doing a batter intervention program, still not seeing his kids. There's no motivation to change when you've been doing treatment for a year and you're still not seeing your kids with unsupervised visits, okay? There's no substitute for a thorough assessment. And generally, my big question to the family court is this: is whatever parenting plan that you're going to impose and limitations on dad or mom, and the treatment that you're going to make them and the hoops you're going to make them go through, whatever good is going to come from all that, does it outweigh the bad that comes from the children not seeing the parent? Because most of the time the answer is no. So if dad was accused of hitting mom 3 years ago and yelling at her, and you're not letting him see the kids for a period of time, you're harming the kids a whole lot more than you're helping them. So what we want to know is there a pattern of serious abuse that's still going on? Does dad have a personality disorder that doesn't guarantee but suggests that there may be more violence later on? Has dad shown no interest in helping himself? Then in those cases, the custody should be very limited, because then it really does affect the children. But too often I see dads who are doing 2 or 3 programs, or substance abuse counseling, domestic violence treatment, individual counseling. The last domestic violence episode was 3 years ago. The children didn't even witness it. And he's getting supervised visits for a year straight. It's a money-making scheme for the people that are paid to do supervised visits. It's a money-making scheme for the attorneys who allow this to continue, and it's disgusting. You know, you've heard all the jokes about attorneys, you know, how many attorneys does it take to turn a light bulb? Whatever. The worst attorneys, among the worst attorneys, not all of them, are the family law attorneys who perpetuate this kind of disgusting behavior. So for me, it's about rendering justice, not only for fathers, but for mothers, but mostly for the children, because they deserve both parents in their lives. And even if one parent is dysfunctional, you know, moms routinely get custody, moms who are depressed and incredibly needy, and the children who grow up with these moms are going to be more psychologically damaged than living with a dad who occasionally throws things. Think about what's worse for a child to experience. Sometimes it's complicated, but we need assessments that really dig deep into how the children are actually affected. We need more assessment tools to measure their emotional reactions and their stages of development, and how their resiliency around all types of family behaviors. But what's happened over the last 10 years is that domestic violence seems to trump everything else. It trumps child abuse, it trumps substance abuse, it trumps ongoing depression, serious emotional disorders that affect the children. And what I say is domestic violence is a serious problem, but let's put it in its place. Most domestic violence is of the high conflict type, and most of that can be dealt with straightforwardly without a long period of absence from father to child. Okay. Anyway, thank you.